Tashidale, welcome to the Awam Tibetan Buddhist Institute and our Heart Essence of Tibetan Buddhism class, number 27. We're nearing the end of our class now. So welcome back. Let me know if you have audio on. You want to turn that audio off during the live part of the video. So let us begin by taking a deep breath. In slowly, back out again, calming your mind and your body. A feeling of profound peace. Then we recite the refuge prayer together. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. So last week we examined the basics of Togal Dzogchen, sky gazing, and the first two of the four stages. So today we continue with that, complete the third and the fourth visions, as known as sky gazing, and then we will continue on to some additional material as we move close to the end of the course. So just by summary, of course, we had the four, which are the direct perception into reality itself. The first one. The second one is progress in visionary experience. The third one is reaching consummate awareness. And the fourth one, extinction into reality itself. But first, the clear light manifests as spontaneous visions of energy. The specific forms and colors will vary from one individual to another as we look into these. Tiny lights, circles, vajra chains, patterns, even a sense of bliss, clarity, and no thoughts might be part of that. They're not always going to be exactly the same from one person to another, so don't worry if you're not getting it exactly the way it's described here. These may or may not be exactly representative of your experience. Secondly, we progress into the more elaborate views, such as the larger objects, more details, various kinds of patterns that may arise, our faces, heads, even bodies of Yidams and other kinds of figures. Usually at this level, it's kind of partial, but when it goes to number 3, then we begin to see more likely full bodies as a part of that. So here we go, third vision, the consummate awareness. Once you've gained confidence in the progressing experiential visions, the third vision, consummate awareness, will begin to manifest, continue to practice with patience and persistence. So the practice, number 49 in the book, is described. Of course, we do our traditional approach in the beginning, reciting do the short practice and the intention as a part of that, the Nundro and 9-round breathing is a part of that. And then consummate awareness. So this is the actual, these are very, very short, concise descriptions. So we continue sky gazing through the hollow Kati channel, going up and into our brain, basically. And the selected posture, as before, the different postures that we could use. Now Yidams and consorts, mandalas, the 5 Buddha families, and so forth may appear. So it's elevating itself into a broader perspective. And so your body becomes liberated into clear light, meaning that the ultimate, the pure nature of mind, which is a metaphor, The ultimate nature of reality is considered to be very clear. So then we dedicate the merit, then post-meditation, we continue to seek opportunities to practice sky gazing during the day and reflect on consummate awareness. Now there's a table in the book that gives us 3 columns like we looked at last week: the outer visions, the inner true nature, and ordinary signs. I'm going to focus here on the outer visions because those are the ones most directly in line with the actual practice. So here there's several different ways that are itemized. The environment as a wrathful palace. So one of the things we see here is things are moving from peaceful to wrathful options. The second one is Yidams in union. So you may have a male and a female together in union. You can probably see this up above my head just a little bit, which is an image in that way with Samattabhadra, Samattabhadri. And then also various mandalas of Yidams. And then countless Buddha fields of rainbow light, all appearances as bindus of 5 Buddha families, the peaceful and wrathful Yidams and bindus and so forth. A universe pervaded by rainbow light. And the rainbow light just appears here and there in your mind. Just amazing. And then enlightenment or pure awareness is the key here. So let's go on to the 4th vision then, the extinction into reality itself, or some say true reality. Once you gain confidence in the consummate awareness, then the 4th vision of extinction into reality itself manifests. You may no longer need formal meditation, as everything is now meditation. Nevertheless, I highly recommend continuing formal meditation as a part of your practice, both for your benefit and as a role model for others. Otherwise, you may assume you have attained full liberation when you have not. It is best not to assume either that you have or have not and continue anyway. Now we look back at the Buddha himself. I mean, he did that. He did basic practices even as he aged. He had practices that he did every day. And they were basic practices that many of the people that he taught were practicing. So we have him as a role model for us to continue practicing, even if we feel that we have transcended what that is trying to accomplish. So in the next one, in number 50, a description of the practice of extinction into reality itself. So extinction is the key word here. So again, we began with our practice, setting our intention, the Nundro, the 9-round breathing. And so here we continue sky gazing through the hollow Kati channel in the selected posture as before until there are signs of having achieved a rainbow body. We went through some parts of the rainbow body and different forms of that previously. The progression of visions comes to an end, but not the end of practice, as I was just mentioning. The Buddha continued on, and we should as well. Then the rainbow body manifests, and you become a Buddha. There's a dedication to, we continue to seek opportunities to practice sky gazing during the day and reflection on reality itself. So again, looking at the first column of the group here, outer visions. These are deluded visions exhausted into Buddha fields. So they go away into a Buddha field, and then all phenomena dissolved into inner space, which is your mind. And then finally the rainbow body, which is also in your mind. Now, we may see rainbows from different experiences that we might have or that are displayed, whether it's a sun going into cloud in different areas, that kind of thing, or whether it's a cremation that goes up into moist air that gives this vision of a rainbow. There's a variety of different ways that that can actually happen. So Togal is characterized by these four visions, the two from last time and the two from this time. So the first one, the vision of direct perception of reality itself. So this part of the text gives us, again, some more detailed explanations of how we can tell what we're accomplishing. Different signs, if you will. So within the expansive space of the view, when awareness is utterly laid bare without fluctuations and doesn't project experience as being other, that is the sign of having anchored awareness within dharmata. So the true ultimate nature of reality, which is interrelated, interconnected, interdependent, and things like the word suchness that I often use as a part of that. Some use emptiness, others ultimate truth, and so forth. Just the impermanence and interdependence that we experience in our practice and in our daily life. So then from that, the mood signs have of having understood this or that. No matter where your attention moves, you understand and realize that it is your own mind. You see that thoughts are projected and returned as self-display, and you understand that they are completely insubstantial, like space. So space is kind of a metaphor here. To recognize this even while dreaming is the sign of having reached the fullest degree of steadiness. The second vision, progress in visionary experience. So the visions get more complex. There is no longer any experience in which you cling to solid reality. So we begin to realize things aren't the way that necessarily that they appear to us. Instead, everything is a sheer luminous display. Everything appears, but there is no solid reference point or clinging. To realize this even while dreaming is to have reached the fullest degree of steadiness. And then the third vision that we just introduced here, no matter what you experience, there is neither any conceptual focus nor any attempt to accept or reject. It just is, whatever happens. Rather, it is liberated without being assumed to be real, so that whether day or night or without needing to remember it, appearance and emptiness are naturally liberated into non-duality. When the illusion of dreaming ends, you have reached the fullest degree of steadiness. Some say that there are no more dreams. Others that they are seeing as illusions during the dream. In either case, these are all perceptions in your mind. Number 4, the vision of extinction into reality itself. So this is the 4th level here. So in meditation, all signs and indications of progress on the path have ceased. Poof. The moving force of appearances has ceased, while the still quality of emptiness is no longer. The non-dual nature of appearance and emptiness neither fluctuates nor changes in any way whatsoever. There is a naturally awake quality that transcends meeting and separation and unfabricated presence and absence without dismantling, which is an utterly naked state of aware emptiness free of clinging. Nothing is real the way we tend to think of it and cling to it. Appearances, etc., are mental. They're all in our mind. In others' perceptions, sense and unobstructed knowledge, or original wakefulness as the all-pervasive capacity is also present here. There is an effortless unfolding of form bodies for the welfare of beings. So form bodies are actual manifestations that you can see as a part of that. Some final notes on Dzogchen practice here. As a Buddha, all conventional reality is extinguished, though you can still perceive how ordinary beings see what they call reality and the discontent that they experience. So typically, that's the way things are. We call things that we actually see, hear, smell, taste, touch as being real. And we get discontented when they turn out not to be the way we would like them to be. So great compassion and Buddha activities manifest to help beings help themselves to attain liberation. As with earlier practices, it is best to do many short practices, gradually extending the hours, eventually to all day and night when you can. Maybe a opportunity on a weekend or wherever to do a little retreat. Some sources say practice like this for 1.5 months, weather permitting, and looking through windows is okay, although not ideal. At some point, as with earlier practices, Trekcho and Togal may merge together. There are various descriptions of that experience. From a great perfection state of mind, Trekcho and Togal are themselves conceptualizations. We're talking about them, we're reading, giving words and labels and all those kind of things. That's conceptualization. Just as Buddha himself said at some point, we must let go of emptiness itself when we live the sacred outlook of the transcendent wisdom. These also disappear. We're talking about the stages of these practices. So in Appendix F, I've provided a copy of the sadhana of the blue dakini, the third of the trilogy of the 3 dakinis. The Trekcho practice in this text is based upon the Rigpa Guru Yoga. And as before, this Guru Yoga, there is no Yidam to visualize. You simply abide in Rigpa. With practice, you will easily have direct experience of knowing the true nature of mind. And Dharmakaya, just as it is, let go and let be. This is then followed by the sky-gazing practice of Togal. Alternate them until they merge into one taste. Now, some people ask me about dark retreats, and you may have heard of these dark retreats, so I want to make just a little bit of a comment about it. It's not something that I recommend, but it might be a possibility. It could possibly be appropriate for you, but I also have some words of caution about doing this approach. The most intensive Togal practice, requiring the direct in-person guidance of a qualified master. So you have to have a qualified lama who's there all the time that you are there, just in case. And that is the dark retreat. This is carried out in total darkness over a period of 49 days. This sensory deprivation creates an intensive experience with movement of energy within space. You will visualize organic or geometric forms and lights, the energy of the transcendent wisdom. To get a brief sense of this experience, you can close your eyes and press lightly on your eyeballs with your fingers while in complete darkness. Maybe several blankets over your head and so forth, get it dark enough that you could do that kind of thing. As the retreat progresses, the experience may include visualizations of forms of Yidams, or dakinis, mandalas, and so forth, which were part of the lower Tantra visualizations. And just as in the third vision of Togal, Padmasambhava does not describe this practice, and it is beyond the scope of the more concise practices in this book for householders. A note about this practice. I think this is very important for you to be aware of if you're interested in doing this. This practice requires a structure, a physical structure, a building, designed specifically for this practice. You can't just set it up arbitrarily, as there can be absolutely no light at all, even when the support lama comes in with meals. So you have to have somebody to help support you, bringing in meals, and that's one of them. But you can't just open the door and let light in. It has to be totally dark. So it has to be at least two stages, the one in which you are doing the practice, and then another stage that is also absolutely black or dark. When that person goes in with the food and closes the door, it's totally black for them. And so then they bring it into your black cell. And then also complete silence. It needs to be absolutely quiet. And it requires both the lama with considerable expertise in this practice, as I mentioned, along with access to a therapist. Why? Well, because all too often, it doesn't mean everybody, and it doesn't even mean necessarily the majority, but it's fairly common that the event of a mental breakdown may happen in this kind of an experience. So some centers, there aren't very many, may allow this for a shorter trial period, just for a week or perhaps 10 days. So you can go in and get used to it and see whether or not you're really up for this kind of a practice for 49 days. It's a long period of time in this setting. And so it is not a required practice to do that, nor is dark retreat or required practice within Togal at all either. The results are basically the same as doing the practice that we have been examining as a part of that. So in conclusion, looking at chapter 19 here, the third training on the great perfection is the wisdom chapter, the Shentong Yogacharya Madhyamaka approach. In the previous paths, we looked into the wisdom of the view of Shravaka, Chittamatra, Sotantrika, Prasangika schools of Buddhism. The latter two are both branches of the middle way, the Madhyamaka. Each provided a slightly different interpretation of the teachings of the Buddha regarding the ultimate truth. In the Path of Great Perfection, we now look at the Shentong school, sometimes referred to as Yogacharya, but is actually a merger of Yogacharya and Madhyamaka. Thus, it is the third branch of the middle way philosophy. It is important here to note that the many sources do not distinguish between Chittamatrans, the mind-only school, and the Yogacarans, due to similarities between their approaches. And it is fairly common to see the names used interchangeably, yet there are important differences. We need to be aware of these. The Shentong does not accept the Chittamatra view that consciousness is truly existent. Instead, they hold the Madhyamaka view as consciousness is non-arising. It's unborn, if you will. Sometimes it's used in that way, or it's transcendent and so forth. So instead, they hold the Madhyamaka view, the consciousness is non-arising and without a self-nature. Yogacharyans argue that their system involves not only recognizing freedom from all concepts, but also the realization of the wisdom mind, jnana, that is free from all concepts, non-conceptual wisdom. Non-conceptual wisdom mind is considered to be the only thing that has absolute and true existence. This, however, does not mean that it can be conceptualized. That's one of the things that is an issue when we get into these things, of whether or not we're talking about a conceptualization or an experience. because a conceptualization is that ultimate state, conceptualization is a relative state, whereas the actual experience, existence of that is the ultimate state. So this does not mean that you can be that it can be conceptualized. It can be realized only through means other than a conceptual process. You must experience it directly, non-conceptually. And this applies across the board in this particular view. There has been some dispute among different schools of Tibetan Buddhism regarding the Prasangika and Shentong approaches. In part, this stems from the fact that the Shentong view has, is said to have been developed by Shantarakshita at Nalanda University and brought to Tibet in first dissemination of Buddhism into Tibet in the late 18th century. When he was invited by King Trisong Detsen, as you probably recall, to build Samye Monastery. In this approach, he included the views of the Yogacharya tradition founded in India by Asanga and his half-brother Vasubandhu in the 4th century, as well as views from Dharmakirti and others. However, although Prasangika texts were written by Chandrakirti in the mid-6th century, they did not come to Tibet until much later, during the second dissemination, the 10th to 12th centuries. This gave the appearance that the Prasangika texts were more recent and more recent and superior to the Shentong text, when in reality it was the other way around. But there is more to the argument than just the dates. The Shentong masters criticized the Prasangikas for their claim that they did not hold any views. Since everything is impermanent and empty of inherent existence, there is no relative or ultimate truth. Everything fits in, so there's no difference between the two. The Shentong argue that if the mere absence of concepts were absolute reality, it would be mere nothingness, empty space, or extreme nihilism. How can nothingness account for appearances? There has to be something that in some sense luminous, illuminating, and knowing. Furthermore, the Shentong argue that the Chitamatrans call absolute was wrongly interpreted by them to be a consciousness, vijnana. According to the Shentong, this clear, luminous, aware quality of mind is not a consciousness, but a non-conceptual absolute reality, jnana, with no seeing and seen aspect, no realizing and realized aspect. This is called transcendent wisdom, prajnaparamita, the Heart Sutra. And this is none other than the non-conceptual Western mind itself, so also referred to as clear light. Nature of mind, dharmata, clarity and emptiness, bliss and emptiness, tathagatagarbha, and so forth. There's lots of terms that are used to relate to this. The Shentong posit that the experience of complete freedom from concepts must also be the experience of clear light nature of mind. So here we get to that difference between conceptualizing and experience. Thus, Prasangikas who deny this must still have some subtle concept which is obstructing or negating this reality. So wars of philosophy that go on in Buddhism, like the Buddha referred to them as a tangle of weeds. The Shentong argued that if there really were no concepts in mind, the clear light nature would shine forth so clearly and unmistakably that it would not be possible to deny it. The practices purify obscuration so that this Buddha nature emerges. If the true nature of beings were not the tathagatagarbha, Buddha nature, they could never become Buddhas. That's part of the assumption, is that the Buddha nature is what enables us to actually become a Buddha. In the same way that a rock that did not contain gold could never yield gold, however much it was refined. The Shentong also criticize other Madhyamakas who say that the Buddha qualities arise as the result of the good deeds, vows, and connections made by Bodhisattvas on the path to liberation. For the Shentong, the Buddha qualities are primordially existent as Buddha nature. Nevertheless, good deeds, vows, connections are necessary for removing veils that obscure those qualities. The Shentong also do not accept that the wisdom mind knows in a dualistic way, so that there is no subject or subtle object of the wisdom mind. It is not a stream of moments of awareness. It is completely unbounded and free from all concepts, including time and space. The fourth time is sometimes referred to, or beginningless time. When the non-conceptual wisdom mind is not realized, it is the basis for impure, mistaken, or illusory appearances to manifest. Once it is realized, it is the basis for the pure manifestations of the three kayas, the Buddha fields, mandalas of Yidams, and so forth. Wisdom mind is both emptiness and luminosity. Emptiness expresses its non-conceptual nature. Luminosity expresses the ability to manifest all pure and impure appearances. In the dream example, dreams arise from the luminous quality of mind. If wisdom mind is not recognized, the dependent nature arises. Once the awakened consciousness returns, you quickly see dreams are mere manifestations of the play of mind. And that we know, that's all dreams come from our mind. So the key in the meditation or non-meditation is personal instruction from a realized master with faith and devotion that can, through his or her skillful means, realization can arise and mature. Gradually, understanding deepens the conceptualizing tendency and loses its hold on the mind. It becomes more relaxed and open, calm, and clear, more experientially. Jamgon Kongtrul describes two approaches in this way: the relative and the ultimate. So the difference lies in the words they use to describe dharmata. Shentong describes dharmata in the mind of Buddha as ultimately real, while Prasangika philosophers fear that if it was described in that way, people might understand that it is the concept of soul or Atman. Well, it might be a legitimate concern, but you want to deny the reality in order to get people to go to that? The Shentong philosopher believes that there is a more serious possibility of misunderstanding in describing the enlightened state as unreal and void. The opposite. There's a risk in either perspective here. Kongtrul finds that Prasangika is the way of presentation best to dissolve concepts, and the Shentong way the best to describe the experience. They're not so dramatically apart from each other, but they do fit in slightly different ways, which, as he is described here, is very helpful. So he also says that the Prasangika is the view when you are establishing certainty through listening, studying, and reflecting. That is non-conceptual, dissolving concepts. Shentong, on the other, in the view, for meditation practice is experientially real as luminous clarity. As previously noted, early texts differentiated between the way things appear, the relative, and the way things are, the ultimate. Mipam Rinpoche adds a term that he calls reflexive awareness as a middle ground, a way to be able to talk about the two together. And my term, which I came up with before I had realized was relative ultimate. So the relative and the multimate combined together, both which provide a way to talk about the ineffable. So what is that which is said to be beyond words? So the important part of this approach is the direct experience. In practice, the Shentong Madhyamaka is very much like the advanced shamatha of Trepchow. So here is practice number 51. It has the same introduction with practice intention and so forth. And then the actual practice is a very concise description. Rest the mind naturally in its own nature. Whatever thoughts arise, there is no need to try to stop them. They simply liberate themselves. Think about it. Whenever a thought comes into your mind, it doesn't stay forever. It goes at some point or other. A lot of times we see this in forms of mindfulness practice. So observe the true nature of mind directly, awareness of awareness, or metacognition, without effort. So we're transcending all of those ideas. So dedication and post-meditation between sessions, stop from time to time to rest your mind in its natural state and carry that awareness over into whatever you are doing, not unlike the Chittamatra approach of being aware moment to moment. So we move now into part 7, innate happiness, and this is an introduction to that, short. Excuse me. The English word awakening, often also referred to as liberation, realization, and enlightenment, is translation of the Pali and Sanskrit word bodhi. This word, the root of this is bud, B-U-D-H, which means to be awake, to become aware, to know, or to understand. So bodhi then implies that the state of realization of the Buddha regarding the true nature of things. And then bodhi includes a sense of understanding karma and reincarnation that lead to our experience of discontent. And remember, the thing that started this whole thing with the Buddha was the idea of karma that was associated with our experiences of life. And that created the problems that we had. And so in order to achieve that, we use the karma and achieve liberation from that in order to overcome those experiences of discontent and others. In India, liberation, moksha, meant the freedom from reincarnation and thus discontent that comes from it. The Shramanans considered one who had attained this liberation to be an arhat, an honorific term meaning worthy for having attained nirvana. This was adopted by the Buddha in the path of individual liberation. In the Vanapada Sutra, the Buddha describes having attained 3 insights. One was on past lives, the workings of karma, and reincarnation. Questionable whether or not he asserted this, or more likely later, after his death, by a follower. Some of these things that we see in the texts have pretty strong evidence of having been evolved, attributed to the Buddha, but appear to have evolved later. And scientists have discovered ways of being able to tell that by what's going on that might be labeled or described in the context of that and so forth. Knowledge arose in me, the insight, my freedom is certain. This is my birth, last birth, and now there is no rebirth. That's the Buddha. However, the idea of liberation evolved over time in the different schools of Buddhism. In the path of individual liberation, it referred to nirvana and understanding the true nature of self and other as having a lack of any inherent existence, appearance emptiness. In that state, you are freed from the three poisons, variously listed as attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or in some cases, desire, anger, and delusion. In the path of altruism, it was said that while attachment and aversion had been eliminated, a subtle form of ignorance still remained for an arhat, kind of putting down some of the early traditions there. This was based on the principle of altruism, the bodhisattva ideal, attaining liberation for all beings. So having that ideal, this had transcended the view that was a part of the early tradition. So individual liberation did not attain this further step that completely eliminates even subtle ignorance. This was articulated as luminous emptiness of transcendent wisdom. Now, I want to point out just one other thing, too. There are lots of stories about the Buddha in the early tradition where he was very, very focused on things about our feeling of our heart and feelings related to how we treat other people and so forth. So it's not as dramatically different as it might appear to be. Thus, the yogin achieved non-conceptual realization of the true nature of mind that transcended conceptual descriptions, although a wide array of terms became equated with this idea of non-conceptual transcendence. This part of the path of altruism, with the emphasis on Yidam practices, the ultimate state changed to transcendent bliss emptiness. However, in the path of great perfection, we're looking at, this idea of the liberated state was refined slightly so that the awareness itself was equated with emptiness, awareness emptiness, and thus liberation. And finally, with the state of parinirvana, you are said to achieve the ultimate state of great compassion emptiness. So those are the stages, the levels, according to those different traditions. So now we move on to chapter 20 here, the liberation in this lifetime. And so this one is focused on the wisdom elements. In Sanskrit, the Sanskrit word vidyadhara means knowledge holder. Vidya means knowledge, specifically the knowledge that comes from wisdom, and dhara means to hold, so a knowledge holder. Thus, the vidyadhara is one who holds wisdom within their consciousness. They are aware of the true nature of things and mind itself at all times, even when they are active in the world. So this doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. But what is this wisdom? To understand liberation, we need to understand wisdom in a Buddhist tradition. The third part of the three teachings is wisdom, impermanence, suffering of dukkha, and non-self, which we examine from the view of each of the four paths. The ultimate result of meditation is right view and transcendent wisdom. This is the realization of ultimate truth, which raises the fundamental question, what is the truth? Can we believe in a non-material reality that is beyond what we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell? How can something be called true when not everyone believes, accepts, or acknowledges it to be so? Can we prove it? to be true? Right? Good questions. They're not easy questions to answer. The historical Buddha himself appears to have observed a noble silence when asked metaphysical kinds of questions, though there are numerous exceptions to that from later talks and editions by other authors. What we can clearly see is that some truths come from our perceptions, or the way things are in the material world. Scientific theories are often used to describe these truths, but other cases are in dispute. Some people believe in evolution, for which there is indisputable scientific evidence, while others reject it and hold creationism or intellectual design, intelligent design, to represent the truth. What is considered to be true varies from culture to culture, country to country. So like ethics, there is a relative component to what we call the truth. Thus, you can refer to such truths as relative truth. At the same time, the very definition of the word truth infers that there are some things that are absolutely true, beyond dispute. This can be referred to as ultimate truth. So what is real? We normally consider that we see, hear, taste, touch, smell to be real, but we know scientifically that our brain is designed to create particular perceptions of what is real. That is vastly different than what we know, even the material world, to actually be. We can't see atoms. Okay, we know absolutely that atoms exist, but we can't see them. There's no way. They're too tiny. So if you doubt this, we have a little experiment that you can do. I'll just briefly mention this. Basically, you find a point across the room and you look at that point, and then you move, without moving your eyes, you kind of expand your view of everything that you can see and see if there are any dark spots. So ideally, you want to be looking at a fairly smooth white surface, or at least a light color. And if you're normal, you're not going to see any. Then we do have two eyes, so one eye could perhaps overlap for the other one. So do one eye. Try it again. Try the other eye. And again, if you're normal, it's not going to be there. And so the next we look at the focus point across the room. You cover your left eye with your left hand, and then you extend your right arm in front of you with your thumb up, covering the focus point across the room. So here what we're doing is picking a point, extending out this way, and then moving our hand over slowly out away from that. So we move to the right side, and then we try it to the left side, and it doesn't change. Now, cover one eye and focus on it going out. And lo and behold, you find a spot where you can't see your thumb anymore. You do the same thing going the other way. Trying out, oh, it's gone. Where did it go? Well, it brings up the question here of what is real here. What's actually there and causing that is that we have a dead spot in each of our eyes. It's where the optic nerve comes into the eyeball. There's no sensors there to put something, but our brain fills in the gaps. So it's important to be aware of that as a feature. And so, let's see where that left off here. So again, it raises the question, what is real? We normally consider what we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell to be real. But science, as I mentioned, is actually understood in a different way than the way that we feel, in the way that our bodies have been developed and the way our brains have been developed as a part of that as well. Okay, then now having some direct experience at recognizing that our brain is wired to delude us, it's actually done that way, into appearances that are not true, let's consider some other scientific evidence that the nature of reality versus what we perceive to be true. We know that matter is made up of atoms, but atoms are mostly empty space. In fact, if we could increase the size of an atom, too small to actually see, but if we could make the nucleus the size of a grain of salt, still pretty tiny, the electrons, which are too small to be visible, would be racing around at the speed of light in a space the size of a 14-story building. It's a very large area. And so, but it's all empty space in between. So to use another example, if you could take the 8 billion plus people on the planet and compressed all of those into the empty space, you get rid of all of the empty space of the atoms of the bodies and so forth, into which they are composed, they would fit into a thimble. Hard to believe, but that's what science tells us. A very heavy thimble, to be sure. All their weights would still be there, but the thimble nevertheless. Atoms are almost entirely empty space. In other words, everything is almost entirely empty space. But our brains make it appear as if the objects are solid, liquid, and gas. That's what we were taught in elementary school. That is the scientific illusion, even though it has practical application. Furthermore, much of the various stimuli with which we are constantly bombarded are screened out by our brain. Our brains themselves can't handle it all. So it filters out a lot of information. Some of our previous experiences, some of our current focus, interests, preferences, and so forth, a wide variety of things. We also just ignore great quantities of it, information overload of the sensory level. Have you ever noticed how walking down a sidewalk, look at either side of a store window to the merchandise displayed inside, or perhaps you look at the reflection of yourself in the window, the outside. Both stimulate continuously present, but makes a great deal of difference where we focus our attention. This ability to focus our attention, our awareness, is critical to our spiritual development. Another example, how our brain creates an illusory reality. Scientists know that the view created by the brain is highly affected by your emotions. Our preconceived ideas of the world, our expectations, and so forth, as much as 80%. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Finally, consider that at birth, an infant perceives the world as one, not dual. Can't differentiate between themselves and what they see. There's no ability yet to differentiate self from other. The brain develops in the early months of life, and it creates the perception of self and other as separate, independent realities. So, what is ultimate truth? There's different views, and religious and spiritual beliefs, considerable difference, and so forth. So, nevertheless, the direct experience of the ultimate, however we conceive it, is described by those who know it directly as being more real than what humans normally perceive it as reality. So we try to describe it is another matter. How can we explain this? Mystics have their views of emptiness and nothingness. Does not mean that there is no ultimate. Things do exist. In Buddhism, the inherent or independent existence is identified. And then everything is considered to be interdependent. We call it dependent arising. An independent existence would mean that it is unaffected by other causes and conditions. Permanent, beyond time, with no beginning, no end, no other parts. This is dependent upon those parts. We cannot find such a thing. So this leads the idea of ultimate is nothingness. But that cannot be the case since we have already established that it exists. So how can it be nothingness? Discussing transcendent wisdom, the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The emptiness means being empty of inherent existence. Then, what we are addressing is whether form, as well as any other thing, characteristic or quality, is empty of the independent existence. Since any form clearly is dependent upon other causes and conditions, it is empty of inherent existence. Furthermore, being empty of inherent existence infers that there is something to be empty of inherent existence, some kind of form. It is empty of this inherent existence. It is dependent and impermanent. This form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Exclude a long list of other descriptions, including many that are frequently used in Buddhist texts. And so this is the representative of the philosophical approach, what is referred to as via negativa, what it is not. Since there is no way to describe what it is, so transcendent wisdom is said to transcend our ability to describe and explain it in any way, but it does exist. For this reason, the Buddha taught the 4 reliances given early in the book. Rely on the teaching, not the teacher. Rely on the meaning, not the teaching or the words. Rely on the definitive meaning, not the provisional one. Rely on the transcendent wisdom of deep experience, not ordinary knowledge. So it is transcended beyond words and concepts. The Zen Buddhism simply say, mu, poof. So the way that we know transcendent wisdom exists is that we have some form of consciousness. We are aware. Awareness is critical to the spiritual path. Consciousness enables us to sense the presence of ultimate directly, not just conceptually. There are multiple levels for consciousness, ordinary consciousness, and one or more levels of subtle consciousness. In Buddhism, each of the senses, as well as thoughts and emotions, our mind, also are said to have forms of consciousness. Thus, we have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so forth. In some traditions, the consciousness is congruent with the notion of soul. In others, it is considered to be very subtle level, which is said to pass on the process of rebirth. Spiritual development is largely a process of training the mind through spiritual practices to increase awareness of increasingly subtle levels, the highest of which is pure awareness, or awareness itself. It is through pure awareness that we will experience transcendent wisdom directly. So we're going to stop there for today, and we'll pick up from there and continue, and hopefully we're going to be finishing everything next week, so July 5th, and hopefully that will complete all of our tasks for the entire text of innate happiness. There are some other things in the appendices and so forth that you may choose to take a look at as a part of that. But in the meantime, please abide softly and deeply in pure awareness with loving kindness and compassion for all sentient beings, always and always. And pray for peace. Thank you very much.